So I've got to admit, I'm slightly hesitant about doing this video, but I know that I put out on some of our social media accounts that I was going to be bringing this lens up to the Cairngorms with me this year to use for photographing mountain hares. And I know that some of you are probably wondering how I got on with it and whether or not it's something which I might be using again. So just as a little bit of a backstory as to why I've been using this lens, I've actually hired this lens for this trip. And the reason for that is because when Hannah and I came up to Scotland last year to photograph mountain hares, I was using this, which is the Canon 70 to 300mm lens. And the reason I was using this lens is because if you watch our channel, you know that generally my focus tends to be landscape photography and Hannah's focus tends to be wildlife photography, which means that between us, we've only really got one decent wildlife lens, and that's this, the Canon 100 to 400mm Mark I. So when we came up last year, Hannah was using the Canon 100 to 400, and the only other lens for me to use was the 70 to 300, which is actually a pretty good lens, I have to say, for the price. This is about £300 new or so, but it's not an L series lens, it's not weather sealed, and when you're up photographing mountain hares, we're quite often in very adverse weather conditions, it's snowing, and so I wanted to try a lens that was say stage up, one that was weather sealed, and also a lens which had a greater focal range. So we've been thinking about upgrading our Mark I 100 to 400 for a while, and we're 90% sure that we wanted to upgrade to the Mark II version of that lens. But in the meantime, we also want to wait for that lens to be on offer before we buy it, and so we thought actually for this trip what I would do is hire a different lens, just to see if there's another lens out there which is probably worth considering over the 100 to 400 Mark II within a similar sort of price bracket. And the obvious choice was the Sigma 150 to 600. So this lens in the UK here, it's about £1,300 new, which is a little bit cheaper than the Canon 100 to 400 normal asking price. So it's sort of a comparable kind of price, but this one obviously goes up to 600mm as opposed to 400mm. And so I was interested to see, is it worth going for this instead, so you get that extra range, or is the image quality of a 100 to 400, is that likely to be much better than this, to the point where it's just not worth going for this option. And so I hired this lens for the week. It cost about £100 to hire, and I've got to say my experience with it has not been at all positive, to the point where at one stage up on the mountain I got so fed up with this lens I just took it off and went back to my Canon 300mm. I actually had to switch the lens over, so the Sigma lens is down here at the moment, and I had to switch back onto the our old 300mm because yeah, just the autofocus on the Sigma was playing up for some reason. I managed to get better photographs with this. So I just need to sort of start off, because I know this is probably going to upset a lot of people, especially if you own this lens. I wanted to just sort of make a few caveats. This lens is hired. I don't know whether the issues I've experienced are specific to this particular lens. That could well be the case. And the other caveat, of course, is that I'm not sure I've been using this lens in the way that it should really be used. So if you're looking for a lens that you want 600mm and you're going to be having it on a tripod, you're going to be using it at your local nature reserve, you're not going to have to walk miles with it, and you're not going to have to use it in blizzards and all of that kind of thing, this lens may well do the job for you. But for me personally, for what I was using it for in this last week, it has not stood up to the job which I was hoping it would do. The first thing to get out of the way, obviously it's a massive lens. If you're buying a 600mm lens that's going to be weather sealed and made out of metal, you expect it to be huge. The weight of the lens is about 2.8 kilos, but quite frankly, I was expecting it to be big, I was expecting it to be heavy, I was expecting it to be hard to lug up to the top of the mountain. So that's not a negative as such, it's just it's something to be aware of if you're thinking of buying this lens. Really, I would say it's ideally suited to, as I say, using on a tripod and using in good weather too. So Perhaps the main issue which I've experienced with this lens, and I've been using it primarily on a 5D Mark II. Hannah's been using a 5D Mark III on her 100 to 400, so I've been using the Mark II. And I've been having real issues with the autofocus. And I've looked up online, and there seems to be a bit of a common theme running through some of the reviews which I've seen of this lens, and that is that it struggles with the autofocus. I've seen some people say that it misses more often than it succeeds. Sometimes it will tell you that it's focused okay, but when you look at the image and it's missed focus. So I've heard of those issues happening, and the general sort of advice for anyone who's been having those issues with this lens is to plug it into a USB dock and upgrade the firmware. The issue I have had with this lens, the major issue, is that, and it seems to be, I think, an issue in cold weather. When I've had it out in the snow, after a certain amount of time, it'll be working fine. So it's not to do with how I've set up the lens. I'm confident that it's not to do with how I've set up the lens. There have been times when it's just stopped autofocusing at all, and it stopped image stabilizing as well at the same time. But if I'm using it handheld, I need image stabilization. It's a 600mm lens, and it weighs a ton, and it's just failed. But even more importantly, when photographing hares, any kind of wildlife photography, I want to be able to rely on that autofocus. And for me, it's just conked out. And I think that it could be down to the temperature. So I don't know if anyone else has had this issue, or if anyone has used this lens regularly in snowy conditions and below freezing conditions, taking it out, and it's worked perfectly without any issues. Please do feel free to let me know below, because I admit it might be a problem with this particular lens. But for me, if I'm spending £1,300 on a lens, one that's supposed to be weather sealed, I want to know I can depend upon it. If I've hiked up a mountain, if I've driven all the way up to Scotland, booked a place for a week here, and I'm out with my equipment, I've climbed up a mountain, it's perfect weather conditions, the light is great, and I see a hare, which is exactly the situation I was in with this lens, I want that lens to work. I don't want to be thinking, is the autofocus going to conk out? And for me, it did, and I had to switch back to this, and the whole point of me hiring this lens is that I wouldn't have to use this lens. But the other issue that I've seen people say in the reviews when people have had issues with the autofocus is that, oh, you need to buy the dock and you need to upgrade the firmware. But personally for me, if I'm spending £1,300 on a lens, I don't want to then be told, oh, you need to buy something else to make it work properly with your camera. Sigma should do that anyway. It should be set up out the box, ready to go with your camera. So that puts me off buying this lens as well. And the other thing is that that's just more stuff to go wrong. If I'm taking this lens up a mountain in the snow, I don't want it to have to, I want it to be dependable. And any of this kind of upgrading firmware and plugging it into USB stuff, it's a lens for a camera. I don't want to have to do that with it. I just want to stick it on my camera and it will work. But perhaps the most important thing, of course, is image quality. And as I say, I've had some issues with this, but at the same time I've looked up reviews and people have been praising the image quality of this lens, saying it's absolutely wonderful, sharp as anything. But I've also seen reviews of it saying it struggles to focus, often end up with soft images, and at 600mm as well, a lot of people have said that it is soft. So I've taken a few test images with it when the autofocus was working, and to be quite frank, I have not been overly impressed. So I thought it would be a good idea just to run through a few sample images which I've picked out from our trip, just to provide a comparison between the Sigma lens as well as the Canon lenses that we've been using. This first shot is a shot that was taken with the Sigma lens at 600mm. Now this is after it's been processed, so if we take a look at the raw unprocessed image, it becomes clear that I've had to remove some heavy vignetting. Now personally, the vignetting of the lens doesn't really bother me too much because that can be removed in post. But if we zoom straight into the hair itself, you can see how soft the image is without any sharpening. So for this image, which was taken at 600mm, I've focused on the eye of the hair. Image stabilization was on, the lens is handheld, and the speed was at 1/1250th of a second. ISO was 400, and to be honest, I'd expect a sharper image at these settings. At the same time as I took this image, Hannah was elsewhere on the hill using the Canon 100 to 400mm lens. Remember, this is the Mark I version of the Canon lens, and whilst it's been hard to find an exactly comparable image, this is the image she took with settings closest to what I was using with the Sigma. Looking at the raw, unprocessed version of the image, here again Hannah focused on the eye of the hair at 400mm, and whilst the Mark I version of this lens is by all means not perfect, I think the images from this lens just have a better quality and feel about them than the images from the Sigma. And also the lens seems to have picked up a lot more detail in the hair itself. Now these two images, which are again raw images straight from the camera, so they've not been processed at all, were taken of the same hair at about the same time. The image on the left was taken using the Sigma lens, this time at 500mm, where it performed a little bit better than it did at 600mm. The image on the right, however, was taken with my old 300mm Canon lens. Remember, this is a lens that you can pick up second-hand these days for less than £100, and personally, I prefer the images with the Canon. So anyway, the other issue which I've had with this lens is actually with this little knob which holds the lens hood on. Now this is a design fault in this knob, which again I've looked online, I've found other people have experienced the same issue, and apparently Sigma have admitted that there is a design fault with this. So if you own this lens and you have the same issue with this, then contact Sigma and get them to replace it. But from what I've read in some of the reviews, Sigma have sometimes been a bit difficult about getting this replaced. I read one review where they actually had to send the lens off. This is a design fault in this one, which means essentially there's a little grommet in here that screws onto the end of this bolt. I won't dismantle it now because it will just fall apart. But if you lose that grommet, it means that you can't get the lens hood on, or you need to improvise some way of getting a lens hood on or buy another screw. It still works, it doesn't affect use of the lens. It does affect, if I was up, when I was up on the mountain, I carried the lens up, not in the camera bag, because I didn't want to take the lens hood off, because if I took the lens hood off, I'd risk losing that little grommet, which doesn't seem to screw back into the end of this. I didn't want to lose that out in the field, so I left the lens hood on, which then meant it wouldn't fit into my camera bag. But it just made me not want to change the lens hood anywhere other than in a safe environment indoors, or where I could make sure that I didn't lose the little bit that goes on the end of the bolt. Again, it's a design fault. Sigma have admitted it's a design fault. If you own this lens, get that replaced. I think the newer versions of this lens may already have an improved design on it, but the way my brain works is that if I think Sigma have overlooked the design of this, it makes me wonder what else they may have overlooked inside the lens that could lead to other issues. And so it's just kind of, for me, it's a confidence issue. When I'm taking this equipment up mountains, and I admit, I do my best to look after equipment, but I do tend to use it in harsh conditions. If I go camping or climbing up a mountain or in the snow, in the rain, the equipment that I buy has to be able to stand up to that. It has to be able to stand up to those conditions, and I need 100% confidence in it. And my experience of a week with this lens has told me that I personally would not be confident to use this lens under all those circumstances. And so for that reason, I sadly feel like I can't really recommend this lens to people. I fully accept that for some people, particularly if they're only really going to be using this lens under good conditions on a tripod at their local bird reserve, having that extra 200mm in the focal range will be a huge benefit, and I'm sure many people would love this lens for that reason. And again, the issues I've had with the focusing may well be specific to this particular version of the lens. If this was mine, I'd be sending it off to Sigma and telling them to sort it out for me. But there are plenty of people who own this lens and are happy with it. But for me personally, if you're going to be using it for more of a kind of photography like I've been using it for this week, I would recommend, you know, maybe thinking about not going for a 600mm, maybe just keeping it down at 400mm for the same price bracket, and going for something that's perhaps more reliable. Anyway, please feel free to leave your comments, good or bad. I'm sure there'll be many. Please feel free to leave those below. If you did find this useful, then please do give the video a thumbs up. But also, if you want to see how I have been getting on this trip and how Hannah and I have been getting on with this trip, then please also go and visit our channel and view our in the field videos of photographing the mountain hares, because it has been a stunning trip. And even if I've not been able to use the Sigma as much as I was hoping to, we still managed to come away with some excellent photos, so please go and watch those videos.